Thanks, Matt. Can you guys hear me okay? Awesome. All right. So as Matt was saying, I'm CEO of Frame.ai, and we are about improving business conversations in team chat. But I'll get a little bit into exactly what that is, but mostly I want to talk about why. And the why is we think that conversation is eating the enterprise. And I mean something specific by that, but first I want to ask a question. How many people out here use Slack? I should have asked how many people don't use Slack. What about MS Teams, other team chat programs? Okay, how many people sent messages to their teams while at this event? All right, we're getting there. We'll get all the way there. What I mean specifically when I say conversation, use of conversation in enterprise is pervasive. I mean, it's what comes from our mouths, but I mean in team chat applications. But what's really interesting about this for this group is I think it's the biggest data opportunity and transformation that's happening right now, because it is accumulating a representation of all of the business activities in your firms. And I think what we do with it and how we work with it is a really interesting question. A few things made this possible. First off, messaging actually conquered business a really long time ago, by some standards, when BlackBerry changed the way we write business email. I remember I was in grad school when this happened, when the first ones started coming out, and we did a lot of government work, and most of us were writing these Usenet-style missives to each other about research, and you could always tell when it got escalated to someone who actually had a job that made them fly around, because the nature of the conversation would change. It would turn into these long staccato threads, and those are now much more the norm in a lot of conversations, and they're moving into team chat. But BlackBerry kind of taught us how to talk as if we're right next to each other on electronic means. And it won because it's portable, but also because it's very flexible. You can use it for fast or slow communication, urgent notifications, FYIs that you don't need a response on. And now increasingly we can actually include structure and interaction that eliminates some of the things that are lossy about our normal interactions. So messaging itself is nothing new to business. What's a little bit newer is popularizing the move from email threads to channels. So this is your life on threads, where when you're writing an important email, you spend a lot of time thinking about exactly the right recipients, making sure you don't miss anybody, wondering who gets added or removed as the thread continues, going back through past threads to figure out where's that one piece of information that I really want to include here. This is your life on channels, where you kind of pick a swim lane and fire. And when you are actually able to get these channels right, they do pretty amazing things for you. First off, all of that work you used to be doing as an individual, deciding who knows what when, is now done collaboratively by your team, who's kind of iterating continuously on the attendance and the purpose of that particular channel. And everyone's individually in control of their own membership, so when you're no longer part of a project, or if you never were part of the project and you just want to check in once in a while, you just get out. You don't join. You can review it later. And if it's being used properly, it becomes this historical record, which is actually useful. And when you get it right, you know, because it starts vacuuming up conversations that you didn't really even know were out there to be had on that channel. People start including things that you're glad to now know about, and it becomes this really valuable historical record about a topic. The last thing, and the thing that makes team chat a platform, and the thing that's probably changing fastest, is the ability to integrate and put other data and systems in the same room as your conversation. So everybody in this room probably uses a lot of automation and data systems continuously in their day-to-day work. So if you're talking about your work, you're probably talking about those. You're repeating something that a system told you, or interpreting it and discussing it. And if you can actually take that system and let it speak for itself, you end a telephone game, and you're able to give everybody exactly the same context. This slide I stole from, this is from 2 years ago, from a 30-person consultancy in Singapore, and there's about 15 items on here. So about every 2 people has a data system that they found worthwhile to integrate in their chat. And this is something people start doing for themselves when they're talking about things, and they just wish that the data was already there so they didn't have to repeat. Nobody likes summarizing a machine. these things have really clear tactical impacts for you. You can learn about, and you have an engineering team, they can immediately begin discussing a change to the roadmap before product gives them a presentation and so on. And information just moves faster and is actually digested faster by groups. So when all these things are working well in tandem, they're very self-reinforcing. So if you get channels together that represent the people, the structure of the people in your company, so you have your team in a channel, they'll start bringing their processes into chat, talking about what they do. As they talk about those processes, they'll start bringing the data that supports their decisions so that they don't have to go run get it every time. Pretty soon they'll realize not everybody wants to see the same data, and they'll refactor the channels and move it. And what's happening is your team chat is collecting a representation of the business activities of your company. And importantly, this is the real structure of the work at your company, not what the org chart or the seating chart makes you think the structure of work at your company is. So we call that structure, if you can measure and identify it, we're calling it the enterprise graph. Please recommend better terms to me. But what I mean is the people, the data, and the processes that make up your business and the relationships between them. And if you have this in a structured form, whatever parts of it you have in a structured form, you can use to really improve those workflows and make sure that the right information is getting to the right places at the right times. It's very new that we have the opportunity to observe this. The fact, the last talk about surveillance is we could only really talk about these kinds of systems when enough of the communication was electronic for that to be a meaningful representation of the activities that you're surveilling. So I'm going to be talking about technology to help extract and work with the enterprise graph. And if I talk about conversational technology, the first thing that comes to mind is probably bots, especially if you've been talking in this space. And that's not what I'm talking about here. So bots are a very specific interface choice, good in situations where you have repetitive work that you can't really afford to do training on, so you need to have a very natural interface. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about sitting alongside human activity, understanding it, and improving it. So this is much more Iron Man than Terminator. I don't know how well that reproduces from the action figures. But our recipe for exactly how that works is this. This is a blueprint for what we got together to build at Frame.ai, which is these two virtuous cycles, right? If I can build a system that understands what's happening in an existing conversation well enough to make suggestions and take actions that assist it, then I can learn from how people interact with those suggestions, and I can use my improved understanding not only to make better suggestions, but to output data and summaries about the conversation that are useful in your analysis of your business processes, and you can make strategic decisions and iterate on how these things are actually happening. So when we began talking to people about this blueprint and learning about how they used team chat, we looked at a lot of different use cases. And we ultimately found that the place people were hungriest for this kind of assistance was not something we expected, but was really obvious in retrospect. And that is business-to-business customer success. So what's special about this, I'm going to talk a little bit over the next few slides. Customer success, like when you start taking high-value customers and having a detailed relationship with them, not a transactional solving a particular customer support problem, is right on this threshold. So customer conversations in marketing, sales, customer support, we've already known for a long time that we need systems to deal with a long tail of those efficiently and reliably. But customer success is when you cross that threshold into operational and strategic conversations. You start bringing in the rest of your team. You start interfacing with the other internal business processes that are a big part of your company's value. And there's not much help there. This is the unstructured land. We're only now documenting it because it's in Slack and other team chat applications. So now this is the threshold where we most need support and assistive tools. And they really need the tools. Once we actually started talking to B2B customer success teams, we found out this is an area that's undergoing radical shift. So one of the big things that's happening, the communication revolution, when everybody raised their hands for Slack, some of you are each other's customers and vendors. And if both of you are using team chat internally to talk, and that's your definition of work and productivity, but you have to go out to email pace in order to have a business relationship with each other, then it starts feeling slow, it starts feeling less productive, and it happens less frequently. There's not as good an information flow. So there is increasing demand for people to move those conversations into team chat, and we see companies inviting their customers into their Slack, opening up shared channels, installing pipelines in between them. It's a mission-critical process, so it's something that we, as an AI company that needs data, we can actually measure success. We can say what it means. Are we helping teams upsell? Are we helping them retain, and so on? And it's a place where people they have ways to measure and think about their ROI on adopting these tools. And finally, it's something that engages your whole team. The reason that you're bringing these conversations, the reason that you're having a customer success person face your customer, is that they need to be able to bring in the rest of the people on your team that make that customer succeed. So what happens when companies actually try to do this using team chat? Well, their customers tend to love it, but there are some big challenges. And these challenges actually extend to a lot of other team chat tasks, but I'm going to focus them on customer success here. First challenge is attention management. So once you have the ability to have lots of pipelines of communication open at once, guess what? You've got lots of pipelines of communication open at once, and if you don't have tools to figure out where you should be spending your attention, you end up with 142 notifications on your icon. Data synchronization. It's pretty easy to get data in team chat now. It's much harder to have a conversation about it and make sure that the outcome of that conversation gets back out. The transactional workflows that we have in other systems, Salesforce, Jira, Asana, those aren't going away. And a lot of mistakes get made when people discuss something and they consider the work done on email or Slack, and it doesn't get back into those other tools that other people are using to interface. And the final one is visibility. You don't necessarily know what's happening in these channels because there is no bird's eye view. It's built for going into one conversation at a time. So these are the things that we're trying to help. The way that we do it, I mentioned this a little bit before, but we basically sit alongside your customer success team in any channel where they're talking to or about customers. And we try to build up a continuous understanding of the conversation and use that understanding to make sure that they're bringing the right people from the team, tools, and data into that conversation. And when it's done, we take that understanding and produce analytics that give you an idea and let you answer some questions you weren't able to answer before about these conversational processes. So is there a weekly ebb and flow? Do I need to add people in off hours? Do I have some customers that are spiking in their usage of my team's time? Or do I have customers that suddenly went away? Those are the types of questions that we try to answer with that component. So I want to spend just a tiny bit of time talking about the data challenges under the hood here. One of the more interesting ones is when a lot of the things that we want to do to help don't require a deep and thorough understanding of your company. So on the initial value here, I think Peter said something about something needs to work out of the box, right? Even if it has this long-term ML proposition, there's a lot of things that we can do without knowing that much about your company's communication in particular to resolve the pain points I brought up, the attention management, data synchronization, and visibility. But the things that we got into this business to do are on the side where we're beginning to understand the enterprise graph. So expertise-based routing, topic inference. Can we figure out in a sort of reproducible way the important topics in a conversation to drive analytics? A key metric for somebody trying to do this, and we've talked also tonight about on-prem solutions, we believe very much that this is your data, this is your business processes, it doesn't get much more sensitive, so we need to do this on a customer-by-customer basis. So the important metric is time to insight. How quickly can we actually be doing things that reflect a real understanding of what's happening in your company? I'm not going to give solutions, I'll just talk about the main challenges. First challenge, and this is the stuff that's starting to be tackled by public APIs about natural language processing, extracting local structure in conversation. So we already are able to extract a lot of metadata from the API. Can we infer entities and sentiments that are significant that give us a clue about the meaning of the conversation? Second challenge that people are starting to talk about for specific applications. conversation is not one message at a time. It has a thread. It has a continuity. Can we build up local summaries of what's happening in the conversation? For us, these are incredibly important. This is what we get our name from. Frame is a semantic frame. And these summaries of what's happening in a conversation right now are the interface point between a free-form conversation and a transactional system that needs to talk about that conversation later on. So these are so being able to build up that local understanding into summaries that are useful as junction points to other tools. And then finally, being able to extract long-lived relationships. What are the relationships between your entities, the metadata and the sentiments, that are predictive of what people talk about, and basically how can we help in the same way that PageRank helped people find more quickly something that they might have reached eventually by browsing? How can we help people more quickly close in on the people they would have invited to that conversation later on at more personal expense and after a few things were dropped on the ground? So these are the challenges that we're working on. The promised land here, there's kind of a hierarchy here of moving on from being an assistant, where we're able to take work off your hands that you're already doing effectively, but make it a little bit more effective, onto a partner that's actually helping you make better decisions by including information that you wouldn't otherwise have had. And then finally, what's really exciting about this is eventually you can take in organizational knowledge that makes you a coordinator, somebody who's able to kind of improve performance and transfer experience from one team member to another. So that's what we're about. If you're interested in this space, please reach out. If you're already talking to your customers in Slack, you can try us right now at Frame.ai. And if you're interested in solving these problems, we're hiring. Thank you.
Fascinating right now. Slack user systems to create that. What do you do right now? Personalize, professionalize all infrastructure companies involved so that people can also do that in real time. Fascinating.
It's a process that's happening on its own, but I think companies are going to end up having to make a lot of choices about how much they benefit from this process that we as humans are just doing very naturally because it's the easiest way to communicate.
So I was curious if you have a kind of like a chat room, let's say, you have multiple threads within there, it's like a constant stream of data that you're not necessarily going to pick up on who's talking to who, what they're talking about, unless you have hashtag or something like that.
Yeah, so that's something we run into a lot. I think that comes up for people because that's the thing that's hard for people to deal with in a chat room if you kind of are interleaving a lot of different conversations. Our best assistance with that right now is to realize it's happening. So we have analytics where we can kind of detect that there's these distinct and unrelated, back to the surprise detection, unrelated topics being discussed. And what we're working on is sort of abilities to help. If we can tell you that's happening, maybe we can also suggest and help you pull that out into a sidebar. So more and more of these systems, Slack included, are offering tools to restructure the conversation a little bit on the fly. Start a thread, create a new side channel, and invite people to that. We're going to work. That's our approach to that problem. But it's a hard problem because basically anything that is really hard for you to do as a human is still going to be pretty hard for us.
I'm curious about summarizing email threads. Let me give a little bit of background. I used to teach NLP at NYC and one of the past projects one semester, and it was actually sponsored by Note, a more service company. We gave a prize and got IP and so on. I don't think my student is that good at it. Okay, I actually happened to talk to a Note on Saturday and said, "Did you do anything with it?" He hasn't done anything with it. You stole a marcher with him, obviously. How good are the summaries?
Yeah, so one thing that we're trying to do, so there are actually quite a few people trying to do summaries in specific domains. It's a long-lived machine learning and even pre-machine learning problem for NLP. The one thing that we're trying to emphasize in our approach is a structured summary. So a lot of what we're doing, the whole idea is to have the summary then be machine readable so that we can use it to communicate with other systems. So one place where we're trying to innovate is recognizing that certain things are data resources that might need to have links associated with them. Some of these entities might be named entities that are referring to people, and they need to be handled and organized differently. We're trying to innovate in that direction, and I'd say that we're more sort of just with the state of the art in terms of the underlying data that we're putting into that structure, which is the entity extraction methodologies and the sentiment extraction methodologies that are kind of coming out of academia right now. One thing that we're really excited about that's state of the art, we're fiddling with and re-implementing the Sling framework that came out of Google a couple of weeks ago. We think there's a lot of opportunities there in terms of creative uses of neural networks to represent semantic frames at different timescales.
Great, I think that's all right. Are you going to be here after the talk? So that will
Absolutely.
chat a little more questions. Thank you very much.
Cheers.